Right, what's all this then? Well, here is everything you need to fix some scratches to an aluminium hub body. What I'm going to show you here can also be applied to pretty much everything else on your bike. So the general practices here can be followed and then applied to whatever scratches you have on your bike and get it looking a bit nicer. Everyone has done it, haven't they? You've got a new part and you've scratched it somehow and you're really annoyed. There's two things you can do about it. One, you can leave it, or you can fix it. It is actually better to fix it because the actual main reason that things are painted is not to make them look cool. It's actually to protect the substrate or the material that the thing's made of. If you leave the material exposed, there's a chance that it will go rusty or some sort of contamination will get in there and cause it to not work as intended, which is not ideal on a bike, especially if you're flying around at 100 kilometers an hour. You don't want it to fall apart or snap. So the best thing to do, if you get a big scratch or a small scratch, is just to deal with it. I think a lot of people don't know how to do this, so hopefully this video will help you understand it's a pretty simple process. The first thing to do is to collect all of your stuff here. What do we got? Here is the thing that's scratched, right? Which in my case is my very expensive, nice, extra light Cyber Rear SP hub shell. I scratched this when my Dura Ace rear mech hanger got seized up, as I've explained in the previous video. This caused the chain to go over the top of the cassette. Yeah, I know, agony. And then the chain scratched against these parts here, taking off the paint. I cried for about a week, of course, and then I decided to fix the situation. I'm in the process of building up a new wheel with a new rim that I've got. So I thought, right, I'll take this chance to take the hub apart and sort out these scratches. The next thing you need is a file, a very fine file. And this will be used to clean off any sort of snagged parts, any really rough parts of the scratched area. After that, we've got some sandpaper here. This is 3000 grit sandpaper. Generally I start with sort of 1000 grit, then go down to 2000 grit, and then down to 3000 grit. I've just got 3000 grit here because actually these scratches are not particularly vicious, so I think that I can deal with them just with this file and then this 3000 grit sandpaper. But for your uses, maybe you need 1000, then 2000, and 3000 to bring it from rough, slightly smooth, and then very smooth. Next, we've got the actual touch-up paint here. This is just automotive touch-up paint with a bit of water on it there. Lucky for me, this is black, right? So with a black item, you can actually get away with using a paint that doesn't exactly match the kind of black that it is, because from anything apart from very, very, very close, two very similar blacks together look like the same black. So that's quite lucky. If your item is a different color or a lighter color, then you have to start sort of getting into proper color matching or color mixing yourself, which I'll explain later. But if your part's black, you're lucky. You just get a black paint that looks similar, matching the sort of the gloss or matte level of whatever item you've got. And then you take it from there. Like I say, I'll explain color matching later, but let's just assume that this matches now. Next, we've got this microfiber cloth here, which goes together with these two rubbing compounds. This is a fine rubbing compound, and this is a finish rubbing compound. So the fine one gets it down to sort of nearly perfect, and the finish really gives it the last sort of glossy shine. This is similar to having something like 1000 grit sandpaper and then a 3000 grit sandpaper, but for even finer finishing. And then lastly, we've got a paintbrush to apply the paint with. Sorry, not lastly. This here is thinner, hobby colour thinner. This will be used to slightly thin down this paint here. So what do we do first? Well, the first thing is we get the item and we have a good look at it. In this case here, you can see there's a scratch there. There's a bigger scratch there. I've actually sanded this one off already. There's a scratch there. There's a scratch all the way around it. So what I'm going to do first, I'll not actually do this now because I've already sort of done it. But what you would do is you would take your file and just file off the any sort of snagged, jaggedy parts that are sticking up, anything that's like sort of, you know, an actual sort of mutilation to the shape, as it were. You need to get that smooth. Once you've done that, you know, don't take off too much material. I think that the key here is to take off as little amount of material as possible, especially if you're using a very lightweight part, because these things are machined down anyway. So taking anything else off is, you know, asking for trouble. So yeah, you get all the sort of snagged, rough stuff off, and then you take your finer sandpaper, and then you just start, you know, sanding it down until it's smooth to the touch. You want to get it as smooth as possible. Don't worry too much if you know, there's some slightly misshapen parts, because when the colour goes on there, you can actually use the colour to sort of slightly build up the flat surface, and then once we sand off and then compound the paint, that'll actually bring it back to flat anyway. But you know, get it as flat as possible. I will say at this point, it's never going to look as good as brand new. It just won't, but you can get it pretty close. So yeah, get that all sanded. Any corners that are sharp, you need to kind of smooth them off, make them rounded off, because paint adheres to rounded, smooth surfaces way better than it does a sharp edge. Once you've done that, you need to get it properly clean. So that'd be like an alcohol wet wipe or some sort of degreaser on. Oh yeah, I also should have said, get this clean before you start sanding it off. It needs to be properly degreased fully before you start this process. Once you've done that, the next step is to get a mixing thing, like anything plasticky that you can put your paint in. As you can see, I've been testing this already. Shake up your paint, open it. Now look, you don't need a lot here, right? The key to this is go easy and build it up in layers. All right, you don't want to put a big blob on there and it just looks shit. If you have to do sort of 10 layers, that's way better than doing one layer, and it'll actually be a better finish as well. After you've done that, you get some of your thinner. You need to experiment with this because your materials will be different to mine, and also, you know, you're never sure how thick your paint is to start with. So what you need to do is get some of the thinner in here, but not a lot, just like that. Okay, keep it away from the blob of paint you've put on there. All right, then just touch it in the thinner and mix it on the edge of the paint. Okay, until it gets pretty thin. You don't want it so thin that the paint is sort of disappearing into the thinner, but you need the paint to be able to run pretty smooth. Once you've done that, now this is the first coating, so it won't cover it properly. It will look sort of half transparent. But once you've done that, you just start gently painting it on. Okay, and you do that until that's covered, and you go all the way around the edges, being very careful. If you notice that the paint is too thick, touch a little bit more thinner in there. You can put your finger on a different part of the object you're painting to stable yourself. If you've got the shaking hands of an alcoholic. Right. And then just keep layering it up. I'm going to do this off camera because I need to be able to look closer at it. But you see what I mean? You're slowly building it up. If you find that it's looking too thin, don't start putting more on top of the paint you've done, because it will all blob together and just pull itself off. Right? Not like that. It'll remove itself back onto your paintbrush. So if you notice it's too thin, just leave it to dry and then do a second coat. It doesn't matter what it looks like until the final coat, really. Okay, so yeah, I'm going to go around and do all these parts, and I'm going to get back to you and show you what I've done. So see you soon. Right, so I've done about 3 coats now on this. You can see that it's building up nicely. It's all black now. And the glossiness just about matches the glossiness of the original anodizing. It's not quite flat, as you can see. There's a little bit of sort of texture under there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to slowly build up the paint in maybe 2 more layers. There you can see there a little bit. There's a little bit of a shape there. I'll build that up slightly in a couple of layers. Once I've done that, then I'm going to hit the compounding on this to give it a final smooth off, and that's done. and then you have to leave it overnight. But yeah, that's looking a lot better. A little tip also I thought of while I was doing this: when you're using the paint, because automotive paint is sort of fairly hardcore, it dries hard onto your brush. So you'll put some in there, then you'll put the this thinner, next to it. As this paint begins to dry or sort of thicken, you can then touch into the thinner and then sort of loosen it up again and make it more liquid again, and then keep painting it sort of on the fly. This means that you can essentially keep using that bit forever, really, and it stops you having to sort of lose your flow. So that's a good way to do it. Years and years of painting Citadel miniatures taught me that. Yeah, so I'm gonna leave this to dry for a bit, give it another couple of coats to sort of build up the surface. Give it a compound with the fine and then the polish, and then that'll be done. So that's how you do it. Again, this is very good to do because it stops the substrate, the metal underneath, or whatever material is underneath of your part, being exposed to the elements. You really don't want that. So even if you painted it bright red, it would still be better than leaving it open. Wouldn't look very good, but there you go. The point I was going to make about color matching, there's two ways to do it. There's the sort of boring way, which is send an email to the company whose part you want to touch up, and see if they'll send you information about the actual colour. Some companies do it, some just ignore your emails, i.e. most of them. Some of them probably don't even know themselves because they just subcontract all their work to a factory in China who just paint it whatever colour they want. But if you can get the information, then you can easily match it. If you can't get it, then you can be more artistic, which I think is the best way to do it. You will mix it on the fly. The way you do this is you find a part of the component that isn't going to be seen. So on this one, I would use something like, this part in here, and then I would say if this was like a green coloured component or something, I'd go to the shop and get a couple of different greens which were close, and then also a black and a white paint, and then a thinner. I'd mix the two greens together, add a bit of white, add a bit of black, and see if I can start getting it close, remembering how many drops of each one I've put in there. When I get it right, I'll try and sort of make a big batch of that and then just test it on here. When you're colour matching though, you need to let it dry before you say, hallelujah, I've found the right colour, because when you're painting it and it's wet, the light refracts through it very differently to when it's dry. So paint it, leave it to dry, and then go back and go, oh yeah, it actually wasn't quite right, or wow, I've got it perfect. Then you can start painting the bit that's going to be seen. Yeah, it's a bit of a skill. It's an art, in fact, isn't it? You'll probably cock it up the first few times. You can practice on another bit of another component, or get yourself down Games Workshop and do it like a real man or woman. Yeah, but that's it really. So yeah, you can make your bike look a lot better. You don't have to put up with scratches. Just get artistic.